The Whispering House, Part 1. Lucas never believed in ghost stories. He was the kind of person who laughed at horror movies and explained any strange noise as wind, old plumbing, or a vivid imagination. But all that started to change the day he inherited his grandmother's house, an old residence in rural Pennsylvania, surrounded by dense forest and deep silence. The inheritance came unexpectedly. A brown envelope delivered by a lawyer directly to his workplace with a simple will. In memory of my daughter, I leave the house to Lucas, the only one who can still hear. It sounded poetic or strange. Lucas didn't understand what it meant, but the fact that he had never met his grandmother, a reclusive woman considered eccentric by the family, already made everything more mysterious. Still, he decided to go there. He needed some time away from the city, from work, from routine, and deep down, he felt a strange curiosity. What kind of house would someone leave with such an enigmatic phrase? Arriving at the small town of Cold Hollow, he was met with discreet looks and uncomfortable silences from the locals. No one spoke to him directly, but it was clear they whispered among themselves. The house stood apart, on top of a hill, surrounded by centuries-old oaks and a fog that seemed never to go away. The gravel road leading to it was narrow and covered with dry leaves. The iron gate creaked loudly as Lucas pushed it open. The first impression was total abandonment. The two-story house had Victorian architecture and a heavy air, as if it were waiting. The windows were covered with dust, the outer boards worn out, but inside everything was strangely intact. Old furniture covered with sheets, old portraits on the walls, the smell of damp wood, and something more. On the first night, Lucas settled on the living room sofa with a sleeping bag. He brought flashlights and some candles, as the electricity seemed intermittent. He spent the time exploring the rooms and taking notes. Everything seemed normal, except for one locked room upstairs. The key was in the lock but wouldn't turn. Around midnight, Lucas woke up to a sound coming from upstairs. Footsteps, slow, dragging, as if someone were barefoot, walking on old wooden floorboards. He held his breath. He stayed perfectly still, trying to identify the sound. It stopped suddenly. Lucas cautiously got up, climbed the stairs, and saw nothing. The hallway was empty. All doors were closed, but passing by the locked room, he heard something, a whisper, very low, almost imperceptible. It sounded like a woman's voice saying something he couldn't understand. Lucas hurried down, trying to convince himself it was just the wind. But outside, no leaf moved, and inside the house, all the windows were closed. That night, he had a disturbing dream. In the dream, the house shook as if it were alive. From the locked room came a black smoke murmuring his name repeatedly. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. And the key, which hadn't turned the night before, was now on the kitchen table. The Whispering House. Part 2. The next day, Lucas woke up with a feeling that something was wrong, but he tried to ignore it. He drank strong coffee, grabbed the key that was now on the kitchen table, and decided he was going to investigate the locked room. He was curious, yes, but also felt a growing fear, as if the house was trying to warn him not to mess with it. With his hands trembling slightly, he inserted the key into the lock of the room. He turned it. The door opened with a loud creak, as if the house was protesting against the intrusion. The smell of mold was immediate, stronger than in the rest of the house. He turned on a flashlight and went in. The room looked untouched, but something in the atmosphere was different. The walls were covered with faded wallpaper, and the floor, although dusty, had a clear path leading to the window. What caught his attention the most, however, was the piece of furniture in the center of the room, a large, dark wooden vanity with a mirror. He approached slowly, feeling the cold air around him. In the mirror, something seemed to reflect beyond his own image. A pale, almost translucent figure appeared momentarily. Lucas blinked, and the reflection disappeared, but the feeling of presence was undeniable. His stomach churned. With his heart beating faster, he approached the vanity and opened the drawer. Inside, he found a series of yellowed letters, some dated over 50 years ago. They were all written by his grandmother, but the content was disturbing. The letters talked about the sounds of the house, about the ancient presence that inhabited it, and that, as she wrote, no one should wake. His grandmother also mentioned a curse that had taken hold of the house, something related to the very foundation of the property. "They will come after you," said one of the last letters. "They do not rest. Don't look at the mirror. Don't open the door." It was a vague threat, but real enough to send chills down his spine. Who were they? And what did his grandmother mean by "don't open the door"? But the most unsettling thing was that these letters seemed to be talking about something Lucas couldn't fully understand. He felt that by finding these letters, he had unearthed something much deeper and darker. As he examined the contents more closely, the air in the room seemed to weigh down. The wind outside, which had been calm before, began to pick up. The trees outside the window swayed wildly. The rain, which had been just a light drizzle, sounded evidently, making a deafening crash. A sound that, for a moment, seemed muffled, as if another layer of reality was beginning to overlap his own. Suddenly, he heard something that made him freeze. Footsteps. Not the dragging footsteps he had heard before, but now faster, closer. The sound came from downstairs. Lucas hesitated. Could there be someone else in the house? He was sure he was alone. With a mixture of fear and determination, he went down the stairs with the flashlight in hand, illuminating the empty room. But as the light danced on the walls, a dark shadow quickly passed before him, disappearing before he could react. He swung the flashlight toward the shadow, but there was nothing there. What was happening? He was starting to doubt his own sanity. There was a logical explanation for all this. It couldn't be a ghost or an entity, but the feeling of being watched, of not being alone, was relentless. He returned to the main room, trying to gather his thoughts. The letters were scattered on the table, but when he moved to pick them up again, he noticed something strange. One of the letters was no longer there. It had disappeared, and in its place, a drawing, a circle with strange symbols covered by a paint that looked fresh. Lucas rubbed his eyes, but the circle remained there, on the table, as if it was waiting. At that moment, the sound of footsteps began again, this time coming directly from the hallway. But now they sounded louder, more urgent. Something was approaching him. The Whispering House, Part 3. Lucas's heart raced. He didn't know what to do. The sound of footsteps grew louder, as if something was coming straight toward him. He looked around, but there was nothing to protect himself with. All he had was the flashlight, now trembling in his hand, and a growing sense of dread. The hallway was empty, but as he walked toward the living room, a cold draft sent chills down his spine. The door to the living room was ajar, and he could hear muffled whispers coming from inside, as if someone was speaking, but the words were unintelligible. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty house. No answer. The footsteps stopped suddenly. Silence took over the house again, but the fear didn't disappear. He knew something was there, watching him, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Not knowing what else to do, Lucas moved forward to the living room and pushed the door open. The flashlight illuminated the far wall, and he saw what had haunted him since he arrived. A large, old mirror covered in dust and marks of time. He knew that mirror had been there before, but now it seemed different. The reflection he saw was not his own. Instead, he saw a skeletal figure with empty eyes staring fixedly at him. Lucas stepped back quickly, hitting his back against the table. His chest tightened and breathing became difficult. The mirror no longer reflected the room as it really was. The images were distorted, as if another reality, another dimension, was being reflected there. The figure moved closer in the reflection, and the voice whispered again, now clear and distinct, as if inside his head. "You should have left." Panic took hold of Lucas. He tried to move away from the mirror, but suddenly the shadows around him began to move strangely. The environment seemed to distort, as if the house itself was taking a different shape. The walls seemed to close in around him, and the air grew heavier by the second. He ran toward the living room door, but it was locked. No way out. Fear paralyzed him, but he knew he had to act fast or be consumed by this invisible force. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out. Lucas screamed and started feeling around in the dark, looking for a way to escape, but the footsteps returned, now closer and faster. He turned around and, in the distance, saw a shadow approaching. It was not a person. It was something bigger, dragging itself along the floor with a soft, dragging sound, as if it had multiple arms. He took a step back, stumbled over something on the floor, and fell. Looking up, there was a hooded figure standing in the doorway. The silhouette was indistinct, but the eyes were like flames. "You shouldn't have come here." The figure spoke with a voice that seemed from another world. Lucas panicked. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. The figure stepped forward, and the air around Lucas seemed to vibrate with a strange, almost tangible energy. He could feel the presence of the figure, not only as a physical entity, but as a force holding him there in that room. He closed his eyes, trying to block the vision. When he opened them again, the figure had disappeared. But something still lingered in the air. The house seemed alive, pulsating, as if waiting for Lucas to make a mistake. Suddenly, a loud sound cut through the silence. A scream of anguish coming from somewhere inside the house. Lucas quickly got up and ran toward the hallway where the sound seemed to originate. Every step echoed, and the scream seemed to intensify as he advanced. Arriving at the back room, he found something he couldn't believe. A locked door, but with deep marks around it, as if something had tried to get out. Lucas knew he had to open that door. Something was inside, something he needed to face. There was no turning back. Using the key he had found earlier, he turned the lock, and the door slowly opened. The Whispering House. Part 4. The creak of the door opening echoed down the hallway like an ancient lament. The air inside was thick, heavy with the smell of mold and something else, something like rotting flesh. Lucas hesitated for a second, then crossed the threshold. The room was small, almost like an improvised cellar with damp, cracked wooden walls. In the center there was a rusted iron chair with leather straps hanging from its arms. On the floor, strange drawings were carved into the floorboards, like archaic symbols that pulsed faintly under the flashlight's beam. It was as if the room itself was breathing. Lucas felt a sudden dizziness and momentarily lost his balance. When his eyes focused again, he saw something in the shadows. An old notebook, its leather cover darkened by time. It rested on a stone pedestal, like an altar. He approached slowly, and when he touched the notebook, a wave of pain shot through his head. The lights flickered. The house groaned, and then he heard voices. They came from all directions, whispers in tongues he couldn't understand, crying voices, laments. But one stood out. It was a woman's, soft, almost a chant. "Help me." Lucas turned quickly. The figure of a woman appeared to his left, semi-transparent like a projection. She was tied to the chair, her eyes wide with pain, her mouth sewn shut with dark threads. "They locked me here. They used me. You need to free my soul." The vision vanished as quickly as it had come. The notebook in his hands trembled and the pages began turning by themselves. He read the ancient texts and realized it was a diary, not of a victim, but of the house's owner, Abel Carrington, a pastor who had been banished from the local church in the 19th century for practices considered heretical. The diary described dark rituals, people disappearing, spirits being imprisoned. Carrington believed he could speak with the beyond and that suffering was the currency of exchange. Lucas read the last passage. "If anyone finds this house, they will know that I opened the gates, that pain feeds me, and that my soul will never leave. I am the house, and the house is what I am." Suddenly, the iron chair began to creak. Lucas stepped back as the room darkened and the door behind him slammed shut on its own. He was trapped. The walls began to vibrate and the marks on the floor glowed red. Black smoke rose from the floor, taking shape, arms, mouths, eyes, an entity formed by all the souls imprisoned there. "Give us back!" the voices screamed. Lucas dropped to his knees, pressing the notebook to his chest. Amid the chaos, he remembered the woman's words, to free. But how? The notebook seemed to pulse like a heart. He quickly flipped through it until he found a passage marked with dried blood, a banishment ritual. It demanded only one thing, a sacrifice. He hesitated. Everything around him was terror, but now he knew. Either he surrendered to the house, or he left it hungrier than ever. With tears in his eyes, Lucas stood up. And for the first time, he spoke aloud the words of the ritual. The Whispering House, Part 5. The words left Lucas's lips like echoes from a forgotten language. As he spoke the ritual aloud, the notebook glowed with a pulsing crimson light. The ground shook beneath him, and the red symbols on the floor flared with renewed intensity. The air became electric, and the room howled like a living thing. Then, silence. The smoke froze in midair. The walls, once groaning, now stood utterly still. Even the voices ceased. Lucas, breathless and sweating, looked around. Had it worked? From the center of the room, the figure of the woman reappeared, clearer now, more solid. She looked at Lucas with tearful eyes, her mouth still sewn shut, but her presence was calm. She reached out a hand, translucent fingers brushing his shoulder. One by one, the threads around her mouth unraveled and fell. She whispered, "Thank you." And then, her body disintegrated into light. But before Lucas could react, the house screamed. The walls cracked, the ceiling trembled, and the diary in his hands burst into flame. He dropped it, watching as it was consumed in blue fire. The floorboards split open, revealing an endless pit below. From the darkness, something ancient rose, a colossal shape, featureless but horrifying. It was Abel Carrington, or what remained of him. "You cannot undo what has been sealed," the thing boomed. "You only fed the hunger." Lucas turned and ran. The door burst open before him as if inviting his escape. He sprinted down the hall, chased by shadows with claws and fangs. The house roared behind him, collapsing in on itself. Just as he reached the front porch, the entire structure exploded in a blinding flash of red light. And then, only silence remained. When Lucas woke, he was lying in the field in front of the ruins, covered in soot and trembling. The house was gone, completely, as if it had never been there. But in his hand, one page of the diary remained, untouched by the fire. On it, a final message was written in blood. "It only begins when the seal breaks."